Hello and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host, Raider. And in this video, what I wanted to do is take a deeper dive into the M21 manual about increase claims. And I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit on the topic. So I'm going to kind of be bouncing around, but all of the manual references that I'm going to be citing and kind of going over is they will be provided in the video description. Now, please bear in mind that if I was to go on every single facet of increase claims, I would be here for 4 hours. And also keep in mind that I'm going with the overt rule about increase claims. Are there certain exceptions where there are exceptions? Yes. That is the modus operandi of the M21 manual, is that there's always going to be an exception. And if you fall into that exception, that is cool. But the I'm trying to fire the arrow at the main target. And the main target is just the gist that the majority of veterans can kind of take away from, that 9 times out of 10, this should be the way the system works. So please bear that in mind. If you've got a separate set of circumstances, I don't doubt it, because the M21 manual has caveats to it and caveats of caveats of caveats. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen real quick and we're going to talk about increases. Okay. And I might get kerfuffled in this thing a little bit, but basically, a claim for increase is basically saying that the condition that is service connected has gotten worse, that there has been a change or worsening in the condition and or circumstance since the last decision. That's the overall gist of it. That's what an increase claim is. You have to be service connected for something in order to increase it. Now, I will say that we will come back to this, because the change and worsening of the condition doesn't necessarily have to be originated by you. So just keep that in mind. You can explicitly claim something for increase, and you can have sometimes the rater or the VSR raise something to issue based upon the fact that of how you say the things that you say in your claim submission. So there are times whenever you can offhandedly say something and it raises something to issue, and it's a great thing because you're like, oh man, I didn't even know that was technically air quote worse. And you can also have it to where it can be a potentially negative situation, and we'll go over that in a little bit. So moving down here into the definitions, this right here, this important section, this talks about how you claim your increase is going to determine how the VA behaves. So, like, in terms of whether or not we get you an exam, whether or not, like, what effective date you might have. Like, there are certain, and I will go over these in just a little bit, but this is kind of warming us up to the fact that um, you can disagree with a prior evaluation, and that has a different set of rules. Is probably where I'm going to leave that at for right now. Now, moving on to the different types of claims for increase. Now, you're going to have compensable service connection levels. You're going to have non-service connection. There's no real mysteries here. I'm just weirded out that SMC is a claim for increase. I mean, I would consider it a new claim, but yeah, I don't know. And then I also kind of weirds me out that adding a dependent is a claim for increase, but I guess you're going to potentially get more compensation out of it. Not a big deal, but these are just the different types. I'm going to just gloss over them for the sake of time. Now, this right here is very important. Okay, a claim for increase must be filed on a VA Form 21-526EZ. Or if you're filing it online, you have to link the fact that you are claiming something that's already service connected to have it become an increased claim. Now, why does this matter? Why does the form matter? And why does it say that the increase evaluation must, they use the word must. Anytime the manual uses absolutes like must, can't, should, they provide no discretion for the rater of the VSR. Now, why that's important is because the VSR has to screen the submissions for your intent as to what you wanted to do. Now, you might write what your intent is. Hey, look, I previously was, given this increase and you confirmed and continued it. You basically left everything the same, even though I have this evidence now that I didn't have then that shows that I should have been increased. The form you submit on is going to overrule and choose how the VA behaves. Because if you state that, hey, look, I'm filing an increase claim on an 0995 form, if the claimant submits this, then handle the submission as this. So if you file it on a 526, we're going to interpret your intent that you want to do an increase exam. However, if you do it, if you file a claim on an 0995 for something that's already service connected, then we're going to, actually interpret it like it's a supplemental claim. And so if you filed on a supplemental claim, this goes back to what I was saying before on this manual reference. So this 38 CFR 3.2500 is a CFR that's associated with supplemental claims. And it says that a claimant may also submit a request for review of a prior evaluation or rate being paid. Any request filed on the appropriate form, which would be the 0995 form, under these review options should be handled under that specific lane of review. Now, what does that translate to the veteran community? Well, what it means is if you should file a supplemental claim, but what you mean to do is file an increase, right? You're saying, hey, look, the last time you guys evaluated me was less than a year ago, and my condition did in fact get worse. I have this medical documentation here that wasn't part of the claim beforehand. Now, if it was part of the claim, like if it's dated, if your evidence is dated during that original rating decision, then a supplemental claim or a higher level review would be the better option. It would actually be better to do a supplemental claim because you can say, hey, look, my evidence at the time was dated this. Can you please retroactively, increase me back as part of that claim? That would be an appropriate use, but that's not actually technically an increase. That's you saying, hey, look, I have this evidence that should have, that technically should have been considered or applied to the prior claim. Could you please do that? So what happens though, if you're somebody that says that, hey, look, I just want a new exam, I'm disagreeing with the prior rating decision, the prior evaluation. If you're just disagreeing with the prior evaluation, and my dogs are up again, what should happen, and I'm going to talk to every VSR right now, what should happen is that when you get the claim for increase like this on an 0995, there should be no new examination. That claim should be directly sent to the rater to have them re-adjudicate, re-review all the evidence at the time to make sure that the veteran's examination was transposed into VBMS accurately. That's what filing an increase on an 0995 should be if there's no new evidence dated during the original claim. There should be no new exam, okay? No new exam at all. But what happens is the VSR will review this and they'll be like, oh, they're doing a claim for increase. They'll get you an exam. And then what happens is, now some of you might go, well, Rater, you're kind of being, this isn't like you're being kind of a jerk face about this. What would be the harm in just getting the veteran an examination on the 0995? I'm glad you asked. The reason why it is a pain in the butt is because make the rater, once you get that exam, you make the rater have to do two separate evaluations. They have to do that original evaluation where they go back in time and look and re-adjudicate your entire claim. Then, because the VSR got the new exam and created new evidence, that the rater has to account for that new evidence. So then they have to make a second rating decision. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but sometimes it is challenging for a rater to make one decision, let alone two decisions, and then merge them together. Okay. They have to merge effective dates together because the effective dates won't actually line up because of the date the entitlement. Actually, let me find it here. Because when we're dealing with a 3.2500, 3.2501 effective date on a supplemental claim, the date the entitlement arose, like when did the change occur, right? If the change occurred after the rating decision, the prior rating decision, then the effective date of that change will be based upon when the change happened, when the worsening happened, and not based upon going back in time to when the first claim happened, because the evidence wasn't true at the time of the original claim. Generally, right? Like you guys, this is going to be the part where the comment section blows up and goes, well, that's not my case. Fair enough. But the effective dates are some of the hardest things for raters to understand, veterans to understand, everybody to understand. But if during the first claim you did not have this evidence and it took you filing the supplemental claim in order for you to get this evidence, then the effective date cannot go back to the first claim. It will be locked within the intent to file or the date of claim for the supplemental claim. I know that's very confusing, but let's just say that you're making the process more complex for the rater. And that might be a good thing for you, right? But if you had done an increase exam, you would have gotten the exact same result with a lower chance of the rater screwing up your claim. Because if they have to do two separate rating decisions and merge them together, just think about all the fun opportunities to screw that up. It's challenging. And sometimes you'll get raters that won't even do it right. I mean, like on their face, they don't know how to do it because the VSR made the rater work outside of the normal process. This is a Frankenstein rating decision that the VSR, by getting a new exam, caused because you are not supposed to get a new exam when you file an increase on an 0995. So that's currently like a behind the scenes type situation as to what's happening and a cautionary tale as to why you shouldn't do it and why you should do just an increase. If you have evidence to the contrary that the original decision was wrong, or maybe it wasn't as accurate because not all the evidence was put before the rater, but it's dated within a time period that could change the outcome of that rating decision, perfect. The 0995 is your tool to get the rating that you deserve. But if none of the evidence, if all of the evidence that you're using to show that the condition is worsened happened after the rating decision, do an increase, please. Save yourself and the rater the frustration, because it takes a lot longer for the rater to do this Frankenstein decision and also has a higher probability of errors, of them not getting it right. So yeah, please just keep that in mind when we're, submitting these, because it is a cautionary tale. Now, going back here, here. Okay. Now, I also wanted to talk about a little bit more. I want to go back up here to the original thing where I said that increased claims are based upon a change or worsening in a condition or circumstances since the last decision. Now, what can happen? Now, this is another cautionary tale. What can happen with that is that the VSR can get an error if they do not pick out reports of increase in your service-connected conditions. So, where this can become challenging is, let's say that you are rated at 70% PTSD, but you want to claim OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, secondary to PTSD. On your claim submission, which is not a claim for increase, by the way, it's a secondary, you're using the secondary theory for service connection. However, if during your claim submission you should say, well, since my last rating decision, my PTSD has gotten a lot worse, which has caused me to gain a bunch of weight, and that has caused me to have sleep apnea. Okay, what the VSR is going to read is, since my last rating decision, my PTSD has gotten worse. That's an claim for increase for the PTSD. Your PTSD will get an increase exam. If you're at 70% and you're not prepared for that increase exam, that could be potentially a reduction. Or if the 5-year rule is in effect, then it's at least one examination towards the required 2 examinations in order for you to be reduced. So I know I'm talking kind of fast and I'm kind of mixing things up here. But the point that I want to make is, when you're doing secondary claims, you want to make sure that you're just reporting that I'm claiming OSA due to weight gain caused by my PTSD. There needs to be no qualifiers that your PTSD has gotten worse, or you will force the VSR to get an increase exam on something that you didn't intend to. Now, a good practice is, if you want to say in a VA form 21-4138 with a secondary claim submission is, hey, since my last evaluation on PTSD, my symptoms are the same. I don't require an increase exam on that at all. I sometimes do that or recommend that because I'm paranoid and I want there to be no misunderstandings about whether or not I am claiming an increase exam or not, because they have to do it. It would be an error for the VSR to not raise that to issue if on the claim form or the documents that were submitted on the same day as the claim. So, yeah. Let me move here to, sorry, lost my place in my notes. So let's talk about increased evaluations. So let's say you got the right, you're intending to file a claim for increase. You filed it on the correct form. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what the exam situation looks like. You will always get an increase exam on a claim for increase as long as you're not at the maximum scheduler, because there is no prescribed standard for evidence that must be presented prior to requesting an examination. What that boils down to is, VSR, the veteran doesn't need to meet an evidence threshold in order for you to get an exam. You see that they're service connected for the condition, there's room for them to get a higher evaluation, send that increase exam. If you have a private DBQ, they're supposed to review that and do the authenticity, credibility, and sufficiency reviews on those private DBQs. And if they pass, like if the private DBQ passes, then what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to send the claim ready for a decision and just hand it straight to the rater to adjudicate, to do the rating on. So if you don't have a private DBQ, expect an examination. If you do have a private DBQ and you get an examination, then that means that they have basically burned your private DBQ. And there is some insufficiency, authenticity, or credibility issue with it. I can't say for sure. But if you have a private DBQ, you should not be getting an examination for an increase unless something went horribly wrong. Now, moving on. That examination will be provided if VA determines there is insufficient competent medical evidence to decide the claim. Okay, so basically what this affords you is, if there's enough evidence to rate you at the next higher, we shouldn't send you for an exam, or scheduler maximum. Like, let's say you can go all the way up to 100% in mental health because you've got all the symptoms checked. Awesome. The only problem with this is that is the rater's domain. So when the VSR is reviewing to determine whether or not you get an exam or not, they're always just going to give you an exam because the VSR doesn't know 38 CFR Part 4, the rating scheduler. They don't know what the scheduler maximum is for any given condition. I mean, they might know a couple of them, like tinnitus. They might understand tinnitus, but they don't know what, colitis's maximum rating is or IBS is. So they'll just order an exam. That's top sheeting. That is a uniform thing that they do. Now, what should they do? They should probably go, learn what the 38 CFR Part 4 is and know that. But I mean, it hold your breath. Or if they didn't know, they could go to their RVSR buddy and ask them. But I'm telling you right now, I would tell my person to stop if they kept coming to me every 2 minutes for, can I do an increase on this? Can I do an increase on this? I'd probably go to their coach and ask them to please stop. Can you please help this human being? But what that's gonna boil down to from a behavioral point of view is anytime you do an increase, you're gonna get an increase exam. That's just the way the things are. Even though it says not to, it says it actually states that there should be some kind of evidentiary review before you just snag an increase exam. But the VSR wants the points. And the VSR doesn't want the hassle. They don't want to take the time to do, all that. So, and this is what it tells the VSR to do: review the evidence of record to determine if it's sufficient to assign the appropriate. Yeah, no, nobody's doing that. I can tell you that right now. Nobody's doing that. There might be one VSR that says, I do that. Well, cool, bud, because the the overwhelming majority doesn't at all ever do that. They just order an increase exam, fast points, quick points, right? Easy peasy. VBMSR now pulls the Capri records for you. So as long as there's no, PMRs to slow it down, they're just going to order the exam, get the exam points, even though it's like a tier 3 claim. They're going to still get points quickly, even though they'll get less points than if it was an 010 or an 040 or something like that. They'll still get points quickly. So they're just going to get an exam. That's the bottom line. Now let's wrap things up a little bit with effective dates. Now I came back here for effective dates and I kind of talked about it a little bit, but claims for increase are governed by the effective dates within 38 CFR 3.400. Okay. The effective date for increase follows the general rule. And the general rule says unless there's a modifier to it, right? The general rule is the date of claim, the ITF, whichever one is earlier, right, is going to be your effective date, unless the date the entitlement arose. So a lot of people have trouble with this terminology and understanding what this means. So it would be like if you did a claim for increase January 1st of 2025, and you did a claim for increase, and then 3 months later, you got knee surgery, right? Like you did a total knee replacement. The date the entitlement arose for your knee surgery is in March. We will not pay you at the knee surgery rate prior to March because the date the entitlement to the higher evaluation happened is March. You can't get paid for a knee surgery before you had the knee surgery. So that's kind of what date entitlement arose means when it comes to this. So the date the entitlement arose typically only, like if you were service connected for mental health and you had a hospitalization, the hospitalization could be the date in which, that's the date that the condition got worse, evidenced by the fact that you were hospitalized. The hospitalization date would be the date the entitlement arose. If you had a surgery, That would be the date the entitlement arose. That's as far back as the condition could go. So, another thing that is important is that 38 CFR 3.400 has a built in earlier effective date, like its own ITF, that can go back up to 1 year based upon if the condition got worse within that year prior to your intent to file or your date of claim. So it actually extends the effective date even further potentially. So like let's say you had a intent to file for your claim for increase. And let's say that your intent to file uh, goes back 6 months. Well, your actual then you can use 3.400 if your symptoms got worse up to 1 year prior to that intent to file. So overall, a year and a half back, you can go in this example if you had medical evidence that showed that the condition got worse. Now, it has to be within the scheduler. You can't just show, man, I had a whole bunch of pain. Well, if pain is not something that's associated with, the next higher evaluation, it's not probative. That's a non-compensable symptom. That doesn't show that something got worse. But if you like let's say you were hospitalized for asthma. You were 0% for asthma beforehand. You had an intent to file in, and 9 months before the intent to file, you had a hospitalization for an asthma attack in which you were, after that, put onto albuterol. Okay. So that fact pattern right there would allow us to go back in time up to like 6 months or 9 months prior to the intent to file and use that hospitalization for an earlier effective date, essentially going back farther than a year. So I know I probably didn't explain this well. Effective dates are the worst thing to try to describe to anybody, to raters, to VSRs. They don't get it. That's why they get messed up a lot of the time. But just know that may be affected, that under this, increased compensation may be awarded on the earliest effective date of which it is factually ascertainable that the increase in disability had occurred if a complete claim or ITF is received within 1 year of this date. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So the ITF, you can go back up to 1 year from the ITF if you have explicit evidence showing that you had a specific condition that shows worsening within the 38 CFRs criteria. I can't stomp my foot hard enough. Just showing that you were hospitalized for something, you might get convalescence for that, right? That might be a form of increase that we were talking about here is, well, maybe if I can find it. When we're talking about other like special monthly compensations or like some kind of it would be a claim for increase, but it would be like you just getting convalescence under 38 CFR 4.29 for over 21 days. Like you could do this, you could use that. But just keep in mind, peruse 38 3.400 and just look at it. It's hard to distinguish effective dates because this is not written well. But the effective date for increases can go back much further. And that's why I say choose the form correctly. Because if your evidence goes back far enough, right, like how we were talking about this right here, sometimes the claim for increase can even exceed the maximum date that you can go back in time by up to a year. Because if you can show that the evidence got worse during that time and it wasn't considered, then yeah, that might be a thing. And I know, guys, this is a little bit of a confusing one. I'm sorry for that, but effective dates are horrible and they're hard to explain. So just keep in mind that it's not always good to do an 0995 for increase because we won't treat it that way. And if you do a claim for increase, make sure that you review your evidence, guys. Come on, you got to do this. You got to review your evidence, and you've got to start taking note of like situations in your medical record that you can use or demonstrate that your condition got worse for VA purposes, that it did exceed the next higher level. It did this or that, because you can get even further back pay for those situations on increase. And it's not spoken about very often, but you can do that. So that's about all I got for you today. We're at the 30-minute mark, and that's actually pretty good for this particular set of topics about increases. I'd like to take the time to thank everybody that watched until the end. If you haven't subscribed, please do. If you like the sound of my voice, please subscribe. If you like my content, please subscribe. And to everyone that has subscribed and you're continuing to watch my content, thank you so much. It's appreciated. And I'd also like to thank all the members, the VSRs, and the Raiders who have decided to throw their hard-earned money at my poor my poor bottom in order to help me fund my new computer, so that way I'm not having to stop every 2 minutes and it overheats. But anyway, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and Raider out.